I'm Stella, I'm 34, female, and after I spent 12 years of my life rebuilding my father's company from the brink of bankruptcy, he was swayed by my younger brother's empty flattery and cut me out completely. So I vanished, and in doing so, I triggered the catastrophic collapse that neither of them ever saw coming. It all started, as most things in my family did, with a quiet and deeply ingrained sense of favoritism. My father, Robert, was a man from a different era. He built Robert and Sons Construction Supply from a single truck and a shed into a respectable, if dated, local business. The name itself should have been my first clue. He had two children, a son, Ethan, and a daughter, me. Yet the sign above the warehouse door, rusty and faded, only ever made room for the sons he imagined would follow him. My brother Ethan, 3 years my junior, could do no wrong. He was blessed with a quick smile, an easy laugh, and the uncanny ability to tell our father exactly what he wanted to hear. He was the golden boy, the charismatic heir apparent who seemed destined to take over despite having the business acumen of a houseplant. I, on the other hand, was the practical one, the quiet one. The one who saw problems and fixed them not with charm, but with spreadsheets, logistics, and long, thankless hours. The pattern was set when we were teenagers. When it came time for college, Ethan announced he wanted a business degree. He chose an expensive private university known more for its social scene than its academic rigor. My father beamed with pride. "That's my boy," he declared, writing a check for the first year's tuition without a second thought. Getting a real-world business education. Ethan spent 4 years learning how to network at parties and came back with a passable GPA and a collection of stories about his fraternity's exploits. A few years later, when I decided on my own path, I chose a top-tier state university for its renowned program in supply chain management and logistics. It was a practical degree for a practical person, tailored to the very real problems our family company was facing. When I showed my father the acceptance letter, he just nodded slowly. Logistics, huh? Well, I suppose someone else got to keep track of the paperwork. There was no check, no grand declaration. I paid my own way with scholarships, grants, and a part-time job at the campus library. My father praised Ethan's ambition while I was the one mapping out the future. After I graduated, I came home. The company was in trouble. My father's old-fashioned methods, handwritten ledgers, disorganized inventory, and a good old boy network that was rapidly retiring were failing. We were losing money, clients were leaving for more modern competitors, and bankruptcy was a shadow looming on the horizon. I walked into my father's dusty office, rolled up my sleeves, and got to work. I spent the next decade transforming Robert and Sons. I computerized the entire inventory system, built a custom logistics software to optimize delivery routes, renegotiated contracts with suppliers, and cultivated relationships with a new generation of clients who valued efficiency over a friendly round of golf. One incident about 5 years in perfectly captures the family dynamic. A small electrical fire broke out in the main warehouse late on a Friday night. It was contained quickly, but it fried the main server and threatened to derail all of Monday's shipments. I got the call at 2 a.m. and drove straight to the office. I called my father, who told me to handle it, and went back to sleep. I tried calling Ethan, who was officially the head of sales. His phone went straight to voicemail. I later found out he was on a weekend trip he hadn't bothered to mention. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I worked with the electricians, manually rerouted a dozen critical shipments using my personal laptop and a mess of printed maps, and personally called every single client who would be affected to assure them their materials would arrive on time. By Monday morning, through sheer force of will, the business was running. We hadn't lost a single contract. When my father came in around 10 a.m., he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Good work, kiddo. See, no need to panic." At the end of that year, at the company Christmas party, he announced the annual bonuses. He gave Ethan an extra $10,000 for his outstanding work in maintaining client morale during a challenging year. My bonus was the standard, modest amount. When I later asked my father about it, he looked genuinely confused. But Ethan's the face of the company, Stella. He keeps everyone happy, you keep the trucks moving. The final and perhaps most painful example came 2 years ago. We had a chance to land the biggest client in our company's history, a major regional developer building a massive multi-year housing project. Landing their business would secure our future for the next decade. For 6 months, I lived and breathed that contract. I analyzed their needs, created a detailed, data-driven proposal showcasing how our unique logistics could save them millions, and prepared a 90-page presentation. The day of the big meeting, Ethan, who had shown zero interest in the project, decided to tag along. He sat silently through my entire presentation, scrolling on his phone. As I finished, one of the developers asked a pointed question about our ability to handle unforeseen delays. Before I could answer with the contingency plans I had spent weeks developing, Ethan jumped in. He smiled his easy smile, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Jim, let me tell you, we're like a good marriage. We're in it for better or for worse. You hit a delay, you call us, and we'll be there. That's the Robert and Sons promise." He then told a charmingly self-deprecating joke about his own golf game. The clients laughed, the tension in the room broke, we got the contract. Later that week, my father took us both out to dinner to celebrate. He raised his glass and toasted Ethan. "To my son Ethan," he said, his voice thick with pride. "He just has that magic touch, walked into that room and sealed the deal with pure confidence. That's what leadership looks like." I sat there staring at my plate, the 90-page proposal feeling like a lead weight in my briefcase. My husband, Mark, squeezed my hand under the table. He knew he had seen it all. I had done the work, but Ethan had gotten the glory. It was the story of my life. I just didn't know yet that it was only the preface to a much larger, more painful final chapter. In the months leading up to the end, the company was a well-oiled machine. My machine. The warehouse was a symphony of humming efficiency. Scanners beeped, forklifts moved with purpose along clearly marked lanes, and the custom software I'd built displayed a color-coded map of every shipment, every truck, and every inventory item in real time. We were not just solvent, we were thriving. Profits were up 300% from when I started. We were the most reliable construction supplier in the state, known for our precision and our ability to deliver on complex, time-sensitive orders that our competitors wouldn't dare touch. This success, however, was viewed through two very different lenses in my family. To me, it was a testament to data, process, and hard work. To my father, it was a mysterious windfall, a sign that the Robert and Sons name had regained its old magic. He saw the healthy bank accounts but had no real concept of the intricate systems that generated them. He'd walk the warehouse floor, nod approvingly at the activity, and say things like, "Good to see everyone so busy. A busy shop is a happy shop." Oh. Ethan, meanwhile, treated the company's success as his personal playground. With me handling the entire operational backend, he was free to be the visionary. His days consisted of long lunches with clients, afternoons on the golf course, and brainstorming sessions for flashy, expensive marketing ideas that I would inevitably have to veto with a gentle reminder of our actual budget. He bought a new sports car with his inflated salary and talked a big game about disrupting the industry and blue sky thinking. His favorite phrase was, "We need to think bigger." My favorite phrase was, "The truck with the foundational concrete for the hospital wing arrives at 8:15 a.m. tomorrow." The talk of retirement started subtly. My father, now 62, began speaking in wistful tones about his legacy. "You know, I won't be around forever," he'd say during our weekly check-in meetings. "This company needs to be in good hands for the next generation." My heart would give a little flutter of nervous hope every time he said it. I'd spent my entire adult life dedicated to this company. I had earned it. I had saved it. In my mind, the succession was a foregone conclusion. I was the unofficial COO, the engine in the machine. The promotion to president would just be a formality, a final, public acknowledgement of the work I was already doing. I even began preparing for the transition, drafting a detailed 5-year growth plan that focused on regional expansion and technological upgrades. Ethan was playing his own game. He started spending even more time in my father's office, not with spreadsheets, but with stories. He'd laugh loudly, his voice echoing down the hall. He started calling our father Chief and peppering his speech with my father's favorite old-fashioned sayings. "You hit the nail on the head there, Chief," he'd boom. "That's the kind of horse sense that built this place." It was transparent, saccharine flattery, but my father drank it up like water in a desert. My husband, Mark, saw the writing on the wall long before I did. He was an architect, a man who dealt in blueprints and hard realities, and he had a front row seat to my family's toxic theater for years. Be careful. Stella, he warned me one evening as I was excitedly sketching out a new warehouse layout on a napkin. What do you mean? I asked, distracted. The new racking system could increase our storage capacity by 20%. He put his hand over mine, stopping my pen. I'm talking about your dad and Ethan. All this talk about legacy, Ethan's been working on him. Don't just assume your work will speak for itself. With your family, it never has. This is different, I argued, though a cold knot of doubt was forming in my stomach. This isn't about a bonus or credit for one project. This is the entire company. He can't possibly, he would. Wouldn't he? Mark's gaze was steady and serious. Remember the beach house incident? You organized the financing, handled the contractors, and furnished the whole place. Who got the master bedroom? Ethan, because he found the real estate agent. Your dad sees what he wants to see, honey, and he wants to see a charismatic son wearing his crown. I pushed his words away, labeling them as pessimism. I couldn't afford to believe him. Believing him meant admitting that the last 12 years of sacrifice, the missed vacations, the 80-hour weeks, the stress I carried home every single night might have been for nothing. I had to believe that competence would win. That reality would trump perception. A week later, my father's assistant sent out a meeting invitation. The subject line was simple: the future of Robert and Sons. It was scheduled for the following Friday in the main conference room. Just 3 attendees were listed: Robert, Ethan, and Stella. Oh, this was it. The night before the meeting, I could barely sleep. I went over my 5-year plan again and again, rehearsing the key points in my head. I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I was finally going to be seen. I was finally going to be recognized. I was going to be named president, and my father would finally say he was proud of me for the work I had done, not just for the family I was born into. As I drifted into a restless sleep, I pictured his face, beaming with pride as he handed me the keys to the kingdom I had single-handedly rebuilt. It was a beautiful, foolish dream. The conference room felt like a time capsule. It was the one room in the entire facility I hadn't been allowed to modernize. The dark wood paneling, the heavy burgundy-colored chairs, and the long, scratched mahogany table were all relics of my father's era. A faint scent of old paper and stale coffee hung in the air. It was a room designed for pronouncements, not discussions, and as I took my seat, the cold leather felt ominous. My father sat at the head of the table, a position of patriarchal authority he wore like a comfortable old coat. He had a small, prepared stack of notes in front of him, which was unusual. He was normally a man who spoke from the gut. Ethan was already seated to his right, looking smug and relaxed in a crisp new suit. He gave me a lazy, confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat opposite him, placing my meticulously prepared folder, filled with charts and projections, squarely in front of me. It felt like a shield. Thank you both for being here, my father began, his voice taking on a formal, solemn tone. As you know, I'm not getting any younger. I've been thinking a lot about the future, about my legacy, and about what's best for this company, the company my father and I built. He conveniently forgot the part where I had saved it from being sold for parts, but I let it slide, my heart thumping against my ribs. This is it, just be patient. He spoke for 10 minutes about the old days, weaving a nostalgic tapestry of handshake deals and challenges overcome. He talked about loyalty, family, and strength. It was a good speech, full of sentiment, but as he continued, I noticed he kept looking at Ethan. His pride was aimed in one direction, and it wasn't mine. The cold knot of doubt Mark had planted in my stomach tightened. A company, my father went on, leaning forward and steepling his fingers, needs more than just good management. It needs a leader, it needs a vision, it needs someone who can inspire people, who can walk into a room and command respect, someone who can see the big picture. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of his words settle in the stuffy room. My hands were clammy. I could feel my own heartbeat in my ears. Then he turned his full attention to my brother. That's why, after careful consideration, I am immensely proud to announce that I am stepping down as president and naming Ethan as my successor. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt on its axis. I heard the words, but my brain refused to process them. It felt like a mistake, a slip of the tongue. I stared at my father, expecting him to laugh and correct himself. He didn't. He was beaming at Ethan, who was effing out his chest, the picture of faux humility. I'm honored, Dad, truly. I won't let you down, Ethan said, his voice thick with an emotion he was clearly faking. My father finally turned to me. The proud, warm expression he'd had for Ethan vanished, replaced by a look of practical, almost dismissive consideration. It was the look you'd give to a useful tool you were deciding where to store. And Stella, he said, as if I were an afterthought. Your skills are, of course, very important to the daily operations. We can't run this place without your attention to detail. Ethan has the vision and you're good with the details, so we've created a new role for you, Director of Operations. You'll report directly to him, and together you two will be an unbeatable team. Director of Operations, reporting to Ethan. It wasn't just a slight, it was a public humiliation. It was a demotion. He was asking me to be the workhorse for my brother's chariot, to continue running the entire company from the shadows while Ethan took the credit, the title, and the power. My shock curdled into a hot, clarifying anger. My voice, when I finally found it, was shaky but clear. Dad, what are you talking about? I slid my folder across the polished table. It opened to the first page, a graph showing the company's revenue growth over the last 12 years. A steep upward climb that started the year I joined. Look at this, I pleaded, my voice gaining strength. Look at the numbers, the profit margins, the client retention rate. I built this. I automated the inventory. I designed the logistics network. Ethan's biggest contribution this quarter was picking a new flavor of coffee for the break room. Ethan bristled. That's not fair. I handle all the top-level client relationships. No, you don't, I shot back, my composure cracking. You play golf with them after I've secured the contracts and ensured their orders are delivered perfectly. You're the mascot, Ethan. I'm the one running the team. I turned back to my father, my eyes begging him to see reason. Dad, please, this is my life's work. Don't do this. My father's face hardened. He waved a dismissive hand at my folder, not even glancing at the data. Stop it, Stella. This isn't about numbers, it's about leadership. And frankly, this attitude of yours is exactly the problem. It's always about you, about taking credit. Ethan understands that it's about the team, about the family name. The hypocrisy of that statement was staggering. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. The fight went out of me, replaced by a profound and devastating clarity. He wasn't just making a bad business decision, he was making a choice. He was actively, consciously choosing his charismatic son over his competent daughter. My work, my sacrifice, my success, none of it mattered. It was invisible to him. In his eyes, I was just the help. I looked at my father, the man whose approval I had so desperately craved my whole life. I saw a stranger blinded by his own biases. Then I looked at my brother. He wasn't even trying to hide his smug, triumphant smirk anymore. He had won. He had whispered the right words, played the right role, and he had won. In that moment, 12 years of resentment of being overlooked and undervalued coalesced into a single, unshakable decision. I would not be his workhorse. I would not report to Ethan. I would not spend one more minute of my life in a place where I was seen as a function, not a person. He wanted me to be good with the details. Fine. He was about to find out just how many details I had been managing all by myself. A quiet descended upon the room after my father's final, cutting words. He and Ethan seemed to expect me to argue further, to cry, or to break down. They were prepared for an emotional outburst. They were not prepared for the eerie calm that settled over me. The hot anger had burned away, leaving behind something cold, hard, and resolute. The decision I'd made in my heart a moment before now took control. I slowly pulled my folder back to my side of the table and closed it. The click of the binder echoed in the silence. I folded my hands on top of it, took a deep breath, and looked my father directly in the eye. I see, I said, and my voice was perfectly level, devoid of the tremor it had held just moments before. You've made your position very clear. I stood up, pushing my chair back without a sound. My father looked confused. Good, so you'll help Ethan with the transition on Monday. I gave a small, humorless smile. No, I said simply. In that case, I resign, effective immediately. The shock on their faces was almost comical. My father's jaw literally dropped. Ethan's smug smirk vanished, replaced by a wide-eyed stare of disbelief. It was clear this possibility had never, not for a single second, entered their minds. I was the reliable one, the one who always stayed, who always cleaned up the mess. A people like me didn't just live. You what? My father stammered, rising slightly from his chair. Don't be ridiculous, Stella. You can't quit. This is your family. It seems we have different definitions of family, I replied, my voice still unnervingly calm. I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't run. I walked with a deliberate, steady pace as if I were merely heading out for lunch. My hand closed around the cool brass of the doorknob. Stella, you get back here, my father's voice boomed, a desperate, angry command. I didn't look back. I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and closed it softly behind me, muffling his indignant shouts. I walked past the reception desk, giving the startled assistant a polite nod. I went to my office, the office that had been my second home for 12 years, and took the single cardboard box I kept under my desk for old files. I didn't pack the awards, the project binders, or the reference books. I packed the few things that were truly mine. A photo of Mark and me from our wedding, a chipped coffee mug he'd given me, and a small, thriving succulent that sat on my windowsill. I placed my company ID badge, my keys to the building, and the company cell phone squarely in the center of my otherwise spotless desk. Then I picked up my box and walked out. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I couldn't. The sense of betrayal was a physical weight, and I knew if I stopped, if I spoke to any of the warehouse crew I'd worked with for years, I would shatter. The drive home was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, I didn't play the radio. The silence in the car was filled with the roaring in my head, a cacophony of my father's dismissive words, Ethan's triumphant face, and a dozen different memories of being sidelined and overlooked. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, the calm had finally broken, and hot, angry tears were streaming down my face. Mark's car was already there. He must have had a feeling. He met me at the door, his face etched with concern. He took one look at the box in my arms and my tear-streaked face, and he knew. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just pulled me into his arms, and I finally let myself fall apart, sobbing into his shoulder for everything I had lost and everything I had given away for nothing. "You're free," he whispered into my hair after I had cried myself out. "It hurts now, but you're free." And he was right. As the initial tidal wave of pain began to recede, it was replaced by a powerful, liberating resolve. That evening, we enacted the plan for what I was already calling the vanishing. First, we drove to the phone store and had my number changed. My old number was now a ghost. Next, I sat down at my personal laptop and drafted a short, formal email. It was addressed only to the generic HR email address, a department that consisted of one part-time administrator. To whom it may concern. Please accept this email as formal confirmation of my resignation from my position at Robert & Sons Construction Supply, effective today, Friday, July 25, 2025. I will not be seeking any severance. Please forward any final payroll documents to my home address. Sincerely, Stella. I set up an autoresponder on my old work email account. Thank you for your message. I am no longer with the company. For assistance, please contact the main office. Finally, I went through my social media accounts and blocked my father and my brother. I blocked their numbers on my new phone before they even knew what it was. I instructed Mark, who agreed without hesitation, not to answer any calls from them and not to pass on a single message. As far as Robert & Sons Construction Supply was concerned, I had simply ceased to exist. I was a ghost in the machine I had built, and I had just taken my hands off the controls. The first week was surreal. For the first time in 12 years, I woke up without the crushing weight of 100 logistical problems on my mind. There were no 6 a.m. calls from drivers about a flat tire, no urgent emails about supplier delays. The silence was deafening and at first deeply unsettling. My body was so attuned to stress that its absence felt like a phantom limb. Mark was my rock. He encouraged me to do nothing. Don't update your resume yet. Don't even think about work, he said, handing me a cup of coffee on that first Monday morning. Just breathe. Remember what it feels like to be you, not the COO. So I did. I slept in. I read novels in the backyard. I cooked elaborate meals. I went for long walks. I slowly, piece by piece, began to reclaim the parts of myself I had sacrificed for the company. I was deprogramming. Each day that passed without a crisis felt like a small victory. The first tremor from my old life arrived 10 days after my departure. It was a frantic voicemail on Mark's phone. It was from Dave, the foreman at our biggest cement supplier. I knew him well. A market. Is Dave over at Apex Concrete? His voice was strained with frustration. Listen, I don't know what's going on over there, but I need to talk to Stella. Nobody at the office knows anything about the custom mix for the hospital project. They tried to send me a standard purchase order, but it's a specialized, high-strength formula she and I worked out months ago. If we pour the wrong stuff, it's a disaster. And my guys are telling me the receiving schedule is a total mess. Nobody seems to know when our trucks are supposed to arrive. Can you please just have her call me? Mark played the message for me. A year ago, that call would have sent me into a 5-alarm panic. Now I felt a strange detachment. It wasn't my problem anymore. What do you want to do? Mark asked gently. I thought for a moment, picturing the chaos that was surely brewing. Delete it, I said, and he did. That was just the beginning. The ripples of my absence began to spread, turning into waves. I didn't have to seek out news. The industry was a small world and gossip traveled fast. Mark would come home from work with stories he'd heard from contractors and suppliers who worked with both his firm and my old one. Heard something funny today, he said one evening over dinner. Apparently, Ethan is trying to rebrand. He spent a fortune on a new logo and is repainting all the trucks. The drivers are furious because he's got them sitting in the paint shop instead of making deliveries. Another day, he told me, Frank from Henderson Builders called me today. He said he tried to place a rush order, something you used to handle for him all the time. He said Ethan told him, we don't do special favors anymore, all our clients are a priority. Frank is now taking his $500,000 a year account to a competitor. The stories painted a picture of incompetence I could visualize with perfect clarity. Ethan was trying to run the company on charm and buzzwords. He was the vision guy after all. He was probably holding pointless mandatory synergy meetings while the very foundation of the business rotted beneath him. He didn't understand the intricate web of relationships, schedules, and custom needs that made the company work. That was all just details. My father, according to the industry grapevine, was in a state of deep denial. When one of his old friends asked him how things were going without me, he had apparently scoffed and said, we're fine. Going through a bit of a transition, but Ethan has a real knack for this. Sometimes you need to trim the fat to grow stronger. Trim the fat, he had called me fat. I was the load-bearing wall he had mistaken for decoration. The most telling sign came from a text I received from Maria, the warehouse manager I had hired and trained 7 years prior. She was fiercely loyal to me, and I hadn't blocked her number. Maria, Stella, I know you said not to contact you, but this is a disaster. Ethan just tried to streamline the receiving process. He's eliminated your tiered priority system. It's a free-for-all at the loading docks. We have trucks with non-critical materials blocking the ones with the time-sensitive girders for the downtown high-rise. It's pure chaos. I don't know how much longer we can function like this. I typed back a simple reply. I'm so sorry you're in that position, Maria. You are a phenomenal manager. Update your resume. You'll have a new job in a week. I knew what was coming. The system I had built was complex but resilient enough to handle small shocks, but it was never designed to withstand the catastrophic incompetence of its new leadership. It was a high-performance engine, and they were trying to run it on pancake syrup. The whole thing was about to seize, and it was going to be spectacular. The breaking point arrived, as I always knew it would, in the form of the Harrison Tower project. It was the massive, multi-year deal I had landed 2 years prior, the one Ethan had claimed credit for. It was our biggest and most complex client, requiring a punishing schedule of just-in-time deliveries for everything from foundational rebar to specialized facade paneling. The contract was a masterpiece of logistics, but also a minefield of penalty clauses. A single significant delay on our part would cost us millions and trigger a default that could bring down the whole company. I had managed it personally, flawlessly, for 2 years. The call didn't come to me, of course. It came to Mark. It was a Saturday morning, and we were enjoying a quiet breakfast on our patio. His phone rang, displaying a number he didn't recognize. He answered on speaker. Hello. A panicked, high-strung voice burst through the phone. Who is this? I'm trying to reach Stella. This is Bill Davidson, project lead for the Harrison Tower. My blood ran cold. Bill was a notoriously demanding but fair client. For him to be calling a personal number on a weekend meant something had go catastrophically wrong. She's not available, Mark said calmly. How can I help you? Not available, Bill's voice cracked with disbelief. My entire project is about to grind to a halt because her company, just delivered 3 tons of the wrong grade of structural steel to my site. The wrong grade, my engineers caught it just before the crane was about to lift it into place. This is a $5 million mistake. It sets my timeline back by at least 2 weeks, and do you know what the penalty clause is for a delay of that magnitude? I didn't have to guess. I had written the clause myself. It was a 7-figure penalty. I've been trying to reach someone who knows what they're doing since yesterday, Bill continued, his voice rising in volume. I finally got that idiot brother of hers on the phone, and he tried to tell me it was a supplier-side miscommunication. I have the purchase order he signed right here. He ordered the wrong material. He tried to save a few $1,000s by substituting a cheaper steel, and now it's going to cost his company its life. I need to speak to Stella right now. I'm sorry, Bill, Mark said, his voice firm as granite. That won't be possible. Stella no longer works for Robert and Sons. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a low curse. Then they're finished, Bill said, all the anger gone from his voice, replaced by a grim finality. They are completely, utterly finished. He hung up. Mark and I sat in silence for a long moment. There was no joy, no sense of triumph, just a heavy, somber feeling of inevitability. The first domino had fallen. It took less than an hour for the desperate attempts to reach me to begin. My old, deactivated phone must have been ringing off the hook, so they moved on to other avenues. First came the emails to my personal account, which I hadn't blocked. The first was from Ethan. Stella, huge misunderstanding with the Harrison project. Need your help to sort it out. Call me. An hour later, another one. Stella, this is serious. Bill Davidson is threatening to sue. Where are you? Then came the texts to Mark's phone. My father this time. Mark, I know you're getting these. I need to speak to my daughter. It's a family emergency. Mark read it out loud and then deleted it without a word. The messages grew more frantic throughout the day. They were pleading, then demanding, then insulting. By evening, they were cycling through it all again. We ignored every single one. We cooked dinner. We watched a movie. We were an island of calm in the hurricane of their own making. The doorbell rang at 9 p.m. We both knew who it was. Mark looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a single, resolute nod. He went to the door. I stayed in the living room, out of sight, my heart pounding. I could hear their voices through the door. Where is she? It was my father, his voice raw with desperation. She's not available to speak with you, Robert. Mark's voice was polite but unyielding. Don't give me that. It was Ethan, his voice shrill with panic. We know she's in there. Stella, we need your help. The company is going to be ruined. The company was your responsibility, Ethan, Mark replied, his voice dropping to a low, cold tone. You were named president. You were the vision. This is your mess to handle. This is my legacy, my father almost shouted. My entire life's work is on the line because she's having a tantrum. That was when Mark's politeness finally snapped. A tantrum, I heard him say, his voice dangerously quiet. She gave you 12 years of her life. She worked 80-hour weeks. She poured her soul into saving your legacy while you praised her brother for showing up. She built that company from the ground up and you humiliated her, you dismissed her, you disrespected her, and you cast her aside for him. You didn't want a daughter, you wanted a tool. Well, the tool has quit. Stella is not available. She will not be helping you. This was your decision. These are your consequences. The finality in his voice was absolute. I heard a choked, sputtering sound from my father. Now, if you'll excuse me, Mark said, you're on private property, please leave. The solid, satisfying thud of our front door closing echoed through the house. I heard the crunch of their footsteps retreating down our driveway. I leaned my head back against the sofa and closed my eyes. A single tear escaped and traced a path down my temple. It wasn't a tear of sadness, it was a tear of release. The confrontation I had dreaded for weeks was over, and I hadn't even had to be there. Mark had been my shield. The last tether had been cut. The collapse was swift and total. The Harrison Tower default was the blow that shattered the company's spine. The multi-million-dollar penalty wiped out their entire cash reserve. Bill Davidson, true to his word, filed a massive lawsuit the following moaned. The news spread through the industry like wildfire. Credit lines were frozen. Suppliers who had already been experiencing chaos immediately switched to cash-on-delivery terms, which Robert and Sons could no longer meet. The well-oiled machine I had built sputtered, seized, and died. Within 6 weeks, the company filed for bankruptcy protection. The vibrant, thriving business was no more. The courts would oversee the liquidation, selling off the trucks, the warehouse, and the inventory for pennies on the dollar to pay off the creditors. The Robert and Sons sign that had hung for over 40 years would be taken down. My father's legacy wasn't a thriving company passed to the next generation, it was a pile of assets to be auctioned off. During those same 6 weeks, my life was moving in the exact opposite direction. After the confrontation at our door, I had felt a profound sense of closure. The next morning, I finally opened my laptop, polished my resume, and sent it out to 2 companies I had long admired from afar. I didn't have to wait long. My reputation, the real one known by suppliers and clients, had preceded me. I was the woman who had turned a failing local supplier into a logistical powerhouse. I wasn't just good with the details, I was a strategic operational architect. I accepted a position as the vice president of logistics for a large national construction firm. They weren't just impressed by my resume, they were actively seeking the skills I possessed. During the interview, they listened intently as I described the systems I had designed. They asked sharp, insightful questions. They saw my value. The salary they offered was double what I had ever made working for my father, with a bonus structure and benefits I could only have dreamed of. More than the money, though, was the respect. It was woven into every interaction, every conversation. I was no longer an afterthought, I was an essential part of their strategic team. 6 months passed. The bankruptcy of Robert and Sons was old news. I was thriving in my new role. The work was challenging and fulfilling. My new colleagues were brilliant and collaborative. For the first time, I felt like I was part of a real team, my contributions celebrated and built upon, not just silently relied upon. Mark and I were happier than we had ever been. The constant, low-level stress that had been my companion for over a decade was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and optimism. We had just booked a 3-week vacation to Italy, a trip I had always put off because I couldn't be away from the office for that long. The final encounter happened on a rainy Tuesday. I was grabbing a coffee at a small cafe near my new office. As I waited for my order, the door chimed and in they walked, my father and Ethan. The change in them was shocking. They looked diminished. My father seemed to have aged 10 years. His shoulders were slumped, the confident bluster he always carried now replaced by a weary sadness. Ethan, who had always been so slick and put together, looked rumpled and lost. The easy smile was gone, leaving his face looking hollow. They saw me at the same moment I saw them. For a few seconds, we all just stood there, frozen. The cheerful bustle of the cafe seemed to fade into the background. My father took a hesitant step forward. "Stella," he said, his voice raspy. "Hello, Dad, Ethan," I replied, my voice even. I was surprised to find that the anger and pain were gone. I just felt a distant sort of pity. I wanted to say, my father stammered, looking at the floor. I made a mistake, Stella. I was a fool. I didn't know what you did for the company until it was gone. I'm sorry. It was the apology I had once longed to hear, but now it felt empty. It was a confession born of failure, not of understanding. He wasn't sorry for how he had treated me. He was sorry that his choice had blown up in his face. Ethan just stood behind him, staring at me with a sullen, resentful expression. There was no apology in his eyes, only the bitterness of a man who had been given the world and had immediately dropped it. I took my coffee from the barista, the warmth of the cup a comforting anchor in my hand. I looked at my father, at the man whose approval I no longer needed. You made a choice, Dad, I said, not with malice, but with a simple, unshakable truth. You chose what you valued more, it's as simple as that, and in the end I made my choice too. I chose myself. I truly hope you both find your way. And with that, I turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving them standing there among the ghosts of what might have been. The rain had stopped, and as I stepped outside, the sun broke through the clouds. I took a deep breath of the fresh, clean air and walked toward my own future, a future I had built for myself, finally leaving them and their collapsed empire behind for good. So to anyone out there who feels invisible, whose hard work is constantly credited to someone else, I have to ask, at what point do you stop trying to prove your worth to people who are determined not to see it? I learned the hard way that you can't force someone to value you. All you can do is value yourself enough to walk away and build your own table instead of begging for scraps from theirs.